Welcome to Vernacular Verbose, Jethro Tull podcast. My name's Joey Vetter.
My name's Eugene Manko.
Today we're taking a look at Crest of a Knave, released in 1987. If you're a fan of the podcast and are feeling generous, you can support us on Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/vernacularverbose. Any donations will go right back into the making of the podcast by helping us cover our editing costs. Again, that's ko-fi.com/vernacularverbose. So Crest of a Knave is, I guess you'd say, one of the more notable albums of the 80s for a variety of reasons. And, of course, the most famous reason being that this is the album that won the Grammy.
Oh, yeah.
Which is kind of, one of those famous little funny stories of Tull history. And I don't know if I have a lot to say about the Grammy. Do you, Eugene?
No, I don't think we should go into that in detail. I think it's been talked about ad nauseum.
It is really funny that they won in that category, which I guess is that and the fact that they upset Metallica, which nobody saw coming. There's a really great little section on the Classic Artist documentary, which I've mentioned a couple of times in some of our episodes, where a couple of different band members talk about that, and Ian kind of describes when he found out that he won the Grammy. I think, as a lot of people know, Chrysalis didn't even send Tull to the Grammys because they were so sure they had no business being there in the first place.
Yeah.
And so Ian got a call in the middle of the night from his agent or publicist or whatever, who was saying, guess what? And Ian said, don't tell me we won a Grammy. And he said, yes, you actually did. So it's kind of a funny story of how that happened. But yeah, we were just talking a second ago off the podcast, and for anybody who's a fan of this album, you may not be a fan of our episode today, because Eugene and I both, I think, haven't heard this album in a long time. And I know this was the first time that I had really sat down and listened to it front to back in a long time. And so there's a lot of songs on here that I'm kind of dusting off for the first time in many, many years. And the primary feeling that I had was that this was a lot worse than I remember it being. So what do you think, Eugene?
Yeah, I have the same impression, because kind of in my mind I lumped Crest together with Rock Island, and I kind of, in my memories, they were both sort of rock albums, in more closer to what I remember of Rock Island, actually. And as I started listening to Crest, I was kind of struck by the realization that it's a continuation of Under Wraps. It's not a stark contrast. It's a very logical next step. There's still drum machine on some of the tracks. There's still the kind of cold synthesizer sounds and sequences on it. It clearly has more of a guitar sound than Under Wraps for a number of reasons. But overall, it still sounds very much in the synth pop, synth rock kind of direction.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I've never viewed this album in terms of being a sequel to Under Wraps or kind of a continuation of Under Wraps or anything, but there are definitely songs on here, especially a couple that I kind of rediscovered as we were preparing for this episode, that I think do kind of feel like it's more in that wheelhouse. But overall, what stands out to me about the music of Crest of a Knave is just, it's... the word I would use is kind of rusty. Like, it's rusty hard rock, if you know what I mean. It's kind of
hard.
Yeah, it's not quite blues, but it's kind of bringing back a bluesy type of feel. There's a lot bigger emphasis on Martin Barre, of course. It's much more like a hard rock direction. That's kind of what I think of when I think of Crest of a Knave. And I've seen a lot of Tull fans who have compared the sound of this album to the Dire Straits. And I'm going to apologize to our older listeners. I have never listened to the Dire Straits. I wouldn't be able to name a single song. But I've heard that a lot about this album, is that it sounds like it was very consciously trying to kind of emulate the style of the Dire Straits.
Well, I'm not sure if they consciously wanted to do that. I'm also not very familiar with Dire Straits, so we won't be drawing any direct comparisons this episode. I don't feel like this album is hard rock, really. Because when I think of hard rock, I think of the lineage that began with Black Sabbath and ended through Metallica and ended it in like death metal. Hard rock is the precursor to metal in my mind, and there is no metal whatsoever on Crest of a Knave, except for the heavy metal instrument, which is the flute.
Right.
So yeah, it doesn't feel heavy at all. That's one of the things that surprised me, because I was expecting a more kind of fuller guitar-based sound.
Yeah.
And what I discovered was very much radio rock situation.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'll mention, which as we go through the track listing, I'll kind of point this out more, but for late Tull, and late Tull for me begins around this time, kind of late 80s, 90s. To me, I kind of group all of that together, like late 80s, 90s Tull, that's kind of all one thing to me. There are a lot of different songs which I would describe as old man hotel ballroom ballad songs. And this is kind of the first album where we start to see some of those. And for me, I just have to say that I just have no interest in listening to those kinds of songs. And I feel like there's a lot of them throughout the 80s and 90s in Tull. And, I'm not faulting Ian. I mean, he can write whatever he wants to write. And I mean, by this point, everyone in the band was getting older, and maybe that's just what the kind of music you're interested in when you get older. I don't know. But there's a lot of tracks on here that just really don't do anything for me. So we'll kind of go through those.
I think there is one song, at least, in that category that I think I really like, but it's not on this album. I used to listen to this album when I had my MP3 CD collection of the Jethro Tull discography purchased at a book market. And I was familiar with it back in the day, or maybe I just played it in the background, because I'm also not very consciously cognizant of some of the songs on this album. And I was a little bit surprised by what I think about them now, comparing songs I remember well to songs I don't remember that well.
Mm-hmm. Something I think I've mentioned before is that Crest of a Knave is kind of where Tull ends for me, kind of the edge of my interest in the discography, especially the albums immediately after this. So Rock Island, Catfish Rising, I know almost nothing about, so that's going to be very interesting for us to go into those. The only exception is I'm kind of familiar with Roots to Branches and a very tiny bit with .com, but aside from that, the rest of the discography is quite wide open to me. So, in fact, if you go on my phone or on my laptop right now, you would actually find that Crest of a Knave is the latest Tull album I even have in my library. So that this is really kind of reaching the boundaries of what I traditionally have been interested in with Tull. So going from here and beyond will be kind of an interesting experience for me, just to experience a lot of this stuff again.
For me, it's kind of a dip rather than an edge, because I'm overall throughout my life I've been less familiar with Under Wraps, Crest, and Rock Island, because at the time of listening to that discography CD, I really enjoyed Catfish Rising. I kind of discovered that, and I listened to that a bunch of times. And of course, I mentioned before, I used to listen to Roots to Branches a lot, because we had the cassette, and it was one of my first full Tull albums.
I think it's worth mentioning as well Ian's voice on this one, because I guess most people would say this was kind of the first album post-Blowout, where the voice is very, very different on this one.
Yeah. He's still reaching for those high notes.
Yeah.
Some of them. So credits-wise, this album is quite interesting.
Yeah. So Ian Anderson on vocals, acoustic guitar, flute, and keyboards. Yeah. And drum machine.
And drum programming.
Yeah. Martin Barr on electric guitar, Dave Pegg on bass. Jerry Conway plays on 4 tracks, and Doane Perry plays drums on 2 tracks. So it's kind of drum machine plus Jerry Conway and Doane Perry. So Doane Perry, I may have mentioned this on a previous episode, but Doane Perry is kind of interesting just because he was the longest drummer in the band's history. But because he came in so late to the band, relatively speaking, I feel like he didn't really get to imprint as much of a legacy on the band and the music as maybe he could have earlier, which is a little sad. I mean, I think Tull didn't really have any hits anymore by this point. I think they were kind of becoming a nostalgia act by this point. And so it's a little sad how, even despite being one of the longest serving members of the band, I feel like his parts were not able to imprint as much on a lot of the music.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's also Rick Sanders on violin.
Yeah, on Budapest, I think.
Yeah, Budapest, yeah, and another track.
Don Perry is also, I forgot to mention this when we did A, but Don Perry is two of two Americans who have been in Jethro Tull, which is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah.
Both of whom were just coincidentally drummers. There's a great story from Don Perry. I think he's told it in different interviews and stuff. He was a legitimate Tull fan as a kid. And he has some story about how he went to see the band in the first couple of years on one of the first U.S. tours, and he actually got to meet Clive Bunker backstage, and he sort of took him to see his drum kit and stuff like that. So it was an actual dream come true for Don to become the drummer later, which is pretty awesome, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting that we have two drummers and a drum machine on different tracks. How do you feel those tracks kind of compare to each other throughout the album? When are you noticing that there's a different drummer on a different track, and how do you compare the drum machine tracks to tracks with live drums?
Well, I think Don Perry is, roughly speaking, he's a more technical drummer than Jerry Conway, which I think is to be expected, kind of given what we know about Jerry Conway and that kind of thing. The drum machine is kind of funny. This will sound very funny coming from an Under Wraps fan, but there are songs on here where the drum machine kind of bothers me, funnily enough. But, in general, I don't know if I would say it bothers me necessarily, but it stands out a lot, I think. Whereas it does, for whatever reason, it doesn't really stand out to me on Under Wraps. But it could just be because I'm more familiar with it.
It probably because it feels to me like it's mixed a little bit better.
Yeah, the snare is not as loud.
Actually, I didn't talk about this I couldn't talk about this on our Under Wraps episode. After we did that, I kind of wanted to sort of ease myself out of that 80s sound, and oddly enough, I did that by listening to Walk Into Light. And one of the reasons possibly is that I'm more familiar with Walk Into Light than I am with Under Wraps, because I used to have that on these double album CDs, which it was paired with Songs from the Wood, of all things. And I found that I actually enjoy it quite a bit more than Under Wraps, for a couple of reasons. One of them is, of course, familiarity. When you have memories of listening to an album, you have a better connection with it, and that's just a personal thing. Another is that for some reason the drum machine on Walk Into Light is mixed better than on Under Wraps. It isn't as loud, and it's overall it has a kind of a calmer vibe. It's not as high. I know you use high energy as more often as praise than not, but I feel like the more relaxed feeling of Walk Into Light kind of vibes with me better than the frantic Under Wraps kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, I haven't listened to Walk Into Light in a long time, but I remember that I like it, and I particularly like Fly By Night. I think it's a great song.
Yeah, it's a wonderful song.
But it is funny how, we were talking on A about how if A was released as an Ian Anderson solo album, it would not be what people were expecting, I think. Because, to me, if you were a Tull fan in 79, 80, and you thought of the concept of an Ian Anderson solo album, I would probably think of, the Aqualung acoustic songs, kind of an album full of stuff like that. But then the first actual Ian Anderson solo album is even weirder than that. It's like proto Under Wraps.
Yeah. What do you think of the cover?
I'm not sure how I feel about it. Part of me likes it and part of me doesn't. I think, let me say, first of all, I actually quite like the name of the album. I don't really know what it means or what it's referring to, but I think it's a very classic Tull title. It's almost kind of not harkening, but it's almost kind of up there with like Minstrel in the Gallery, as kind of, cleverly using medieval vocabulary and that kind of thing. But the cover art itself, I think the minimalism of it is cool. I like the idea of what they were going for. I think it kind of suffers a little today by looking a little bit dated, but it's not too bad. But I don't know. I'm not crazy about it, but I think the minimalist approach to it was kind of cool. But that's kind of as much as I can say about it, I think.
I kind of enjoy it. I think it looks great on a T-shirt. I have one. because I wanted to get the 50th anniversary tour design with kind of the bright psychedelic colors, but they didn't have one in my size, so we got one for my wife, and I got the Crest of a Knave because it was the best one of what was remaining. Yeah, I'm not a massive fan of the type. I find it weird that Tull is so large and Jethro is so small, and the kind of a Celtic calligraphy looks nice, but it's very spread out. In terms of type, I have mixed feeling about this. But the crest itself, it looks cool. I think maybe it doesn't look as cool as an album cover as it does as a T-shirt.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever actually seen this album like physically in person, because the coloring of the yellow background is very inconsistent in the photos that I've seen of this. So I've seen some images where it's a very dark yellow in the back, and then others where it's a very pale one, and I'm not sure what it actually is.
And there are ones where it's a very bright yellow.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the worst of the possible background variants. If it even exists like that, even it may be an artifact of scanning.
Yeah.
Just the digital, it's just the digital version that looks so bright.
Let me say first of all that I don't know if this is common for everybody, but the album covers in general, and especially the color palettes of album covers, actually very much influence how I perceive music. I don't know if you're the same way at all.
Sure.
But to me, I wouldn't call it synthesia or whatever people call that. I feel like everybody these days says they have synthesia or whatever. But music to me, it kind of has color. And obviously the album covers represent actual color, a color palette. And, there's a lot of examples of color palettes of album covers that I think really match the music. And that's very satisfying. And there's a lot of other examples of color palettes that very much don't match the music. And for this one, the crest itself doesn't really match the music that much, just because this music doesn't feel that medieval to me. But the color, I think, actually matches the music quite well, where it's kind of dusty and raw and barren, and to me that kind of characterizes a lot of the music on this album.
Yeah, I can see what you're talking about. I don't have synesthesia, and I don't really associate music with colors, but I am still a visual person, and I am influenced by the imagery, by the design of a cover, by the mood that it sets.
Yeah.
And this cover is to me kind of disconnected from the album in my mind.
Track 1, Steel Monkey.
As the moon slips up and the sun sets down, I'm a high-rise jockey and I'm heaven-bound.
So this is an interesting one. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was the lead single from the album.
Yeah.
It was at least a single. And I think that this song is a little sad to me, just because I think there's the bones of a good song here. But just the keys sound is like, oh my god. It really takes me out of it. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it kind of does. It's a sequencer. It's not even live keys played live.
Yeah.
It's a number of notes just put into the memory of a synthesizer, and just the play button smashed. And well, yeah, this is one of the most under-wraps sounding songs on the album.
Yeah. And
kind of a standard, I think, already for a Tull album. Like a really high-energy song put up front. Actually, the lead single from the album, I think it was from Stormwatch on, I think. We've had North Sea Oil, we've had Crossfire, Lap of Luxury. And there was a music video for this.
Yeah.
Looks pretty much dated at this point. But yeah, it's kind of fun. It's the way the video looks. Again, it doesn't really connect with the song for me, because of course there's like construction workers and building sites depicted in the video, but there's also kind of a film noir, a little bit feeling with the way the musicians are filmed, with lots of shadows, and this song doesn't feel to me like it's got that vibe. I think filming like that would have been more in place for, I don't know, Nobody's Car.
Yeah, I still think of that video whenever I hear this song. My dad had a VHS of the 20 years of Jethro Tull tape, or whatever it was. He had a tape of that. And a bunch of different stuff was on it, including this video, so I remember it from that.
I think musically there's an interesting, like you said, that there's the bones of a good song. There's a very interesting situation harmonically, where the bulk of the song is in minor. It's just hanging on a single minor chord, venturing sideways a couple times. But the chorus has a sequence of also beginning with 2 minor chords, but that sequence is taken from the parallel major key of the song. That entire sequence of chords, can you guess my name, can you guess my trade, and so on, it anticipates a resolution into a major chord, but we get a minor chord there instead. I think it represents in this song the sort of a feeling of vertigo that you get when you're high up on a building construction.
I actually quite like the lyrics on this song. It's kind of, in a way, it's almost kind of a connection to, like, I don't know, Working John, Working Joe, and kind of the connection between working classes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the kind of
parts of it I think are pretty clever.
And Andersonian Trade Ode, another one. And very unique, of course, like we discussed before about other songs. Who else would write a song about construction workers?
I think the high-pitched bridge is kind of funny, where the sequencer kind of goes high-pitched. And there's also slap bass there, which I remember a couple episodes ago I mentioned how rare slap bass is on Tull tracks, and as we've been hearing more and more, I've been noticing more and more with Dave Feggs.
Yeah. He doesn't lean into it, it's just an accent with his playing, which is, in my mind, a very good use of slap bass.
I don't know, there's not a lot of songs on this album that I listen to in my free time, but this is actually one of them. And I don't know if I would call this a good song, but I listen to it sometimes. I don't mind it. I think there's kind of the bones of something good here, but it never quite reaches it.
I can see how it could have been successful on the radio, but overall, it doesn't really excite me much. There's
actually, as an aside, there's a YouTube video you can look up online. They played this song on the .com tour, apparently. And there's a German TV show they did around that time where they actually play this song. And it's a little funny to listen to, I guess, with Ian's voice and stuff, but it's kind of one of those weird things that I would never expect them to be playing that late.
Did they have the sequencer?
I think it was playback, yeah. So we should have mentioned in the member lineup that there is no keyboardist on this album, or no dedicated keyboardist. It's just all Ian. And personally, I think this album suffers quite a bit from that.
Yeah, there's a couple interesting things about the recording of it. It was recorded in Ian Anderson's home studio, which is as close to bedroom production, I think, as Jethro Tull ever got.
Yeah, Under Wraps was too.
Was it? Oh, I didn't realize that. One of the other funny things about the recording that they mention is that Martin's guitar was all recorded through a single amp, a single 12-inch 15-watt amplifier, and it's actually a pretty good technique. It sounds like a cheap version of a production, but it actually isn't, because when you record a guitar in the studio, what you actually are doing is you're recording a single speaker. No matter how many speakers and how large your amplifier is, what you're doing is you're putting a little microphone next to the cone of a speaker. So the rest of the speakers don't matter. And it is a technique. You can get a huge sound out of a small pig nose amplifier, because what you're doing is you're just recording that little piece of air vibrating very close to the speaker cone. So I don't think that takes away anything from Martin's guitar playing or Martin's guitar sound. It could have been mixed louder or more prominently or with more beef to it, probably. Then it would have been more hard rock.
So part of the reason that I call this album hard rock is just because of the kind of soaring solos you have in a lot of the songs. And especially on this one, I feel like the guitar tone they were trying to go for, especially in the beginning with the da-da, like it's part of what makes it sound very dated, I think, but it's very much trying to go for like an 80s Guitar Hero type thing is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, could be that. Track 2, Farm on the Freeway. This one's been played live a lot.
Yeah,
I think.
Even today.
Yeah, even today. I heard it on one of the 2 shows I went to. So it is clearly a song that's stuck in the Tull legacy for a long time. I enjoy it. I think it's one of the standout songs on this record. One of the things I noticed when listening to this album again is the bridge, which is just one phrase repeating before it goes into the guitar solo, and that kind of ta-da-da-da-da-da-dum. And I thought about that And I kind of imagined that phrase being repeated over and over and over to the point of you beginning to anticipate what's going to come next, because you're waiting for it to go somewhere, and it doesn't. It just goes da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. I think it's the protagonist of the song, looking at the place where their farm used to be and hoping that they're going to wake up from a dream right now, that they're imagining it, and they'll blink and the farm will be there, and it's not. And it's the moment where the farmer is being stuck in denial of that situation that's happened to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's my takeaway from that otherwise really odd bridge, because if you just analyze it musically or without going into the story of the song, it feels like they had a musical idea but they didn't know where to go with it, and so they just repeated one phrase over and over. But if you look at it as an artistic decision, then I think it starts to make sense, and to me it makes sense in that context.
I agree with you that this is one of the standouts of the album, and even though I was aware of the legacy of this song, this was actually one that I hadn't listened to in quite a while, but it kind of held up for me, I think. You know, there's parts of it that, again, I have to say make it sound really old. I think there's crazy heavy reverb on the drums in the beginning, which makes it sound really aged. And I think the little chimey key sound, which is actually all over this album, is a little cringy for me. But in general, I think it's at its strongest, you know, during the chorus. In the melodic line about "I was a rich man before," I think is really nice and kind of haunting. So for that reason, I like it. The bridge that you were talking about, it's quite proggier than I remember it being, which was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, the rest of the song is built around a 2-chord vamp. It goes from 1 to flat 6, oscillates between 2 chords, and it's a kind of a thing you hear in a lot of songs, and it's a kind of like Chopin. You hear it in a lot of songs, for example, Chopin. It's a plaintive, wistful, harmonic feel where just one note is changing by a semitone, and it goes from one to the other. It never quite resolves. You never feel like it's arriving somewhere. It just goes from one chord to another, and you keep feeling that something may happen, but it doesn't. And that's where the nostalgic and wistful atmosphere comes from in here.
I kind of wonder with the lyrics, like obviously this is not a biographical song, of course, but you know, I do feel like for Ian to write a song like this, I think it had to have come from a somewhat personal place, being that he was an actual farmer at one time, and of course not a land farmer, an agricultural farmer, but a salmon farmer. And you know, I'm not saying that this was something that actually happened to him, but I think this was definitely a song that could only come from somebody who was actually in that trade for a period of time.
Yeah, possibly. There's also, you know, it's a story that's, I think, appears a lot in modern culture. Prominent example is actually Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which begins with that same premise, but on a planetary scale. I think it might come from Ian reminiscing about being a farmer in general, but it's also another trade song. And I'm not sure that his specific experience as a salmon farmer comes into play here a lot, because this is just a tragedy of a person in a very specific context. Which is one of the things that Ian uses a lot when writing his songs.
So I mentioned on the Broadsword episode that there's an interview with Dave Letterman that Ian did, and if I remember right, there's a part where they talk a lot about kind of his business, the business side of his life beyond music. So at that time it was farming, and just one of the things that he mentions is that for him, when he goes to the airport and that kind of thing in public, he's much more interested to talk with, you know, quote unquote normal people, blue collar workers, carpenters, farmers, that kind of thing. He kind of mentioned how that's what the people he's interested in talking to is those kinds of people. And there's parts on this album that I think really speak to that part of his personality or life, I guess. So not just this song, but also Steel Monkey, I think, is kind of in that sort of vein. So there's I think of a lot of those kinds of inspirations when I hear some of this album.
Yeah, I like the very open, unresolved end of the song, because with that kind of harmonic turnaround, it feels to me like finally the farmer moves on and turns away from the past into the future, and it kind of sounds a little hopeful but scary at the same time. But the end of the song is, I think, a very, very clever decision and one of the best elements of it.
Some of the guitar stuff on this song is pretty interesting. Like, there's a lot of whammy bar being used, which I don't remember Martin being a big whammy guy. Also, the crazy, if I remember right, this is coming out of the bridge. There's like a crazy guitar slide, which it almost sounds like it's like Martin Barr trying to do shoegaze, like My Bloody Valentine or something. It kind of sounds like that sort of thing on a Tull record, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, that I believe that's the moment you're talking about is what I think of as a little bit of a imitation of the sounds of a Freeway.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I never thought of that.
Yeah, it sounds like we are standing next to that road with the cars and trucks just whizzing by.
Yeah, I bet that's what it's supposed to be. The only other note I have is the very heavily reverbed drums at the beginning. I don't know if this was kind of what they were going for or not, but the beat that Doan is playing is actually quite a reggae type beat, which is kind of interesting, I think.
In the very intro with the ta-dum, ta-dum, or...
Yeah, he's playing eighth notes on the hat and then just kick drum to anchor it, which is kind of a reggae thing, especially when it's reverbed out like that.
Yeah, a little bit. But it does have a little bit of a reggae feel. But normally, I think in reggae, you will put an accent either on 1 and 3 or just 3, famously the one drop.
True.
And what he's doing there is he's playing the kick on 2 and 4. Where in reggae the snare would normally be.
Yeah. Track 3, Jumpstart.
Through the bruised machinery, the smoking haze of Fender Street. Another day with ball and chain, I do my...
This was another single, and I actually think this was kind of a big song, relatively big. This album actually was, not a big album, but it was kind of a return to commercial success for the band, I think. It was probably kind of the last real commercial success they saw. And this song is kind of a standout, I'd say, for me. It reminds me of kind of the older, folkier Tull. It kind of feels like a callback to that, although it's also quite bluesy.
Yeah. I enjoy this song. I really like the groove of the verse where the bass comes in. It's not quite a straight groove, which you have a lot of on this album. The quiet part before the second chorus is very unexpected and sounds really cool.
Something interesting on this one in the drum track. So I didn't listen to this album on I didn't listen to this album on headphones. I usually listen to music on speakers when I can. But there's kind of this constant hi-hat going on in the drum track, which I think was overdubbed, but I'm not sure. I think it probably was. Because there's a bunch of right-hand tom stuff happening. So to me, I think it sounds like it was overdubbed over, which is kind of an interesting choice.
Like something was overdubbed.
Yeah, the hi-hat specifically.
It's Jerry on the drums on this one. So they might have overdubbed things because Jerry's parts were often not that technical.
Yeah. There was also a video for the song, which I haven't seen in a long time, but if I remember right, it was kind of the band playing in like an empty bar or ballroom. And it reminded me a lot of the bar in Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up, the Rick Roll video. That's kind of what it reminds me of.
Yeah, I think someone should start a Rick Roll, but with Jumpstart.
That'd be funny.
Yeah, make it the new Rick Roll. I feel the flute solo in the song is a little bit standard. A little bit of just everything you will expect from a Jethro Tull song without anything specifically standing out. But when the guitar joins in and they start delivering a line together, I like that moment a lot.
Funnily enough, this is just kind of a random fun fact, but when Tull won the Grammy at the Grammys, if you watch the video of when they won the Grammy, the clip of music that they jumped to was the beginning of the flute solo of this song. That was the clip from the album they used.
Well, because it's just 100% Tull.
Yeah.
If you had to choose a moment on this album that just embodies Jethro Tull, it would be that.
Yeah.
Just a flute solo with a lot of scat singing.
The middle of this song was, again, kind of more proggy than I remembered it being, which kind of surprised me.
Yeah, that quiet part, I think it's very cool and not something you will expect with this sort of folk rock vibe.
Yeah.
So that's a very enjoyable moment.
Yeah, this is one that stands out for me, one that I would kind of listen to on my own. This is a total aside, but one of the things that this song makes me think of from my childhood, and I doubt anybody listening will be able to relate to this, but we'll see. When I was a kid growing up, there were a series of educational computer games that were called Jumpstart, and they were some of my favorite things in the world when I was a kid growing up. They were little computer games that taught you how to read and how to do basic math and that kind of thing. And so for me, that was where I first heard the phrase jumpstart, and that was what I always associated this phrase with. So whenever I read jumpstart, I immediately think of that little thing, locked away in the back of my mind from my childhood.
How do you feel about the lyrics in this one?
I'm just gonna have to remember what they are. I haven't read them. They're not ones that stick out to me.
I think that they are kind of a continuation of what you've been saying about talking to blue collar.
Yeah.
Because it's the sentiment, this feels like the general sentiment of a working person towards the world that surrounds them.
Yeah.
Should I blame the officers, or maybe I should blame the priest, and so on. Track 4, She Said She Was a Dancer.
She said she was a dancer. If I believed it, it was my business. She surely knew a thing or two.
I would like to begin with the elephant in the room. I didn't analyze the entire Tull discography in terms of use of harmonic devices, so it might not be the only place where this appears, but it's the prominent place where this appears. This song is based on the infamous Pachelbel canon chords, the 4 chords of pop music. They're also referred to as the Axis of Awesome chords, after the band who made the most famous fun of them on the internet. Is the chords you'll hear in Let It Be, in No Woman No Cry, in I think Crazy by Aerosmith, and many, many, many other songs. And there's a reason why this 4 chord loop is so popular, because it carries on, it gives you a good kind of dynamic to the melody, and it's ambiguous enough not to have a single key center. It kind of oscillates between 2 possible key centers, which gives you a lot of freedom. But yeah, why these are called the Pachelbel canon chords, because this is the harmony in Pachelbel's canon in D, which goes like dum da dum da dum, and you can sing this canon to every one of those songs. There's a wonderful video on YouTube about that by Rob Peravonian, which is called the Pachelbel Rant. And for that reason, I think this song suffers a lot, because it sounds like a radio pop hit. I think it was a single as well, because I saw it on Wikipedia, and there's a little single cover with the female face with a 5-point star superimposed.
Yeah, and it had a video too. It was an extremely low effort video, if I remember right.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that or Jumpstart.
From what I remember, it's just Ian at a mixing desk singing into a microphone. That's the whole video.
Oh, fascinating.
I could be wrong though. Yeah, it's funny about the chords. I didn't realize this was the same chords as Let It Be, but I can hear it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the first of the hotel ballroom ballads that I would say exist in kind of later Tull discography. And, I'm going to keep it real that this song is a total skip for me. It's just so old sounding. It's so 80s ballroom. I get nothing out of listening to it. It's not for me.
I'm not a fan of this song either, and I'm not thinking of it as old. I'm just thinking of it as, radio pop. That's what it evokes in me. What's funny about this and many other, as you say, hotel room songs, there's a thematic emerging in Ian Anderson's lyrics. Songs about attractive young women from an aging rock star's perspective. And what's kind of funny about that is that these songs, when he writes them, they mostly deal with, instead of dealing with fantasies of carnal conquest, a lot of them explore the idea of consent. And most of them, or even all of them, end with the aging rock star retreating when nothing happens.
Yeah.
So in that regard, it's, I think, laudable for a rock song to kind of explore that.
Yeah, like I said, I kind of wonder if just there's a pattern to aging, and just, things come with the different phases of life. And, I don't have a problem with Ian writing whatever he wants to write about. I don't care. So part of me just thinks that as he gets older, this is just kind of the kind of music that you gravitate towards, or at least that you gravitated towards in this period. And there's an old Confucius parable, and there's no way I'm going to get this exactly right if I quote it, but the general idea is, when you're a student, be a student. When you're a teacher, be a teacher. When you're a parent, be a parent. That kind of thing. And so to me, it's perfectly natural that, when you get to that phase of life when this is the kind of thing that reaches out to you, by all means, entertain it. Or I guess another way of putting it would be, the old Bible verse about there's a season for everything under heaven or whatever. So, I get it, but it's not for me.
I fully agree.
Some kind of cringy lyrics too. Like the one about Pepsi.
Yeah. I wonder, there's a line that I noticed here. Hey Moscow, what's your name? If you don't want to say don't worry, it would probably be hard for me to make it scan. So he wrote that, and in about 15 years wrote a song about Relitsa Vasilieva, which is as close to a Russian name as you get. So he managed to make a name like that scan in the end.
Yeah.
Probably because it was bothering him that he kind of admitted defeat on that in 1987.
Track 5, Dogs in the Midwinter. I actually kind of like this one. It has kind of a nice little light feeling, and I really like the central guitar and flute part. I think that sounds pretty cool.
It does. I think what ruins it a little bit for me is the drum machine.
Yeah, I had a note here about that.
Could have been so much better with Jerry or Don.
Yeah, the drum machine kind of stands out on this song for me, and it doesn't sound like a track that needed drum machine. I feel like, and I mean, I don't know what the situation was when they were recording. I mean, maybe they just didn't have real drummers available most of the time, but I don't know. I just feel like this one didn't really need drum machine.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder, how the drummer availability influenced what they did at the time, because there's a video that I very recently saw for the first time because it surfaced in the Facebook group, with Phil Collins playing drums on Pussy Willow because Jerry was unavailable.
Yeah.
And apart from the fact that I think Phil's drumming on that song is the best drumming that song had ever had, very possibly they really didn't have a drummer available when they were recording this song or maybe some other songs on the album. But yeah, I'm not sure why they were in such a hurry to put them out.
Which that has always seemed funny to me, just because, I mean, even if they were recording this at Ian's house, I mean, how many drummers in the world would gladly, for free, play on a Jethro Tull album if they needed one, But I don't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe Ian didn't know any drummers.
Yeah, he probably didn't.
Just like he didn't know any guitar players.
This isn't really an answer to this question, but just worth pointing out that Don Perry lived in L.A., I think, and still lives in L.A., to my knowledge. And so in the later years of Tull, when Don was with Tull, when they played in Europe and places like that, a lot of the time Don wouldn't be on the tour. He would often be replaced by usually James Anderson, like I mentioned a couple episodes ago. Ian's son actually filled in for him in a couple shows. And the reason for that, which I read in an interview somewhere, was just that it was ridiculous for Don to have to fly all the way to London just to start the tour. And so in a lot of cases in the later years, he just wouldn't even do that, and they would just get a substitute. So I don't know if that had something to do with the availability, but it just makes me think of what an interesting lifestyle that would have been to play professionally in an English band when you live in the US, and the logistics of what that would be like.
Yeah. This song overall, it gives me a feeling that if it were played by the classic Tull lineup, it would be a very good classic run-of-the-mill Tull song, not something outstanding.
Yeah.
But something that could fit perfectly well on any of the early albums.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
But this very sterile arrangement that it has on this album kind of robs it of that impact.
Yeah.
It could be on A, it could be on, I don't know, Heavy Horses. Because I can very easily imagine it with Barry's drumming and John's piano.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The arrangement as it is on here, it gets kind of repetitive and boring, I think. But I think there's good melodic ideas there, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the lyrics would have a better impact, because it's a bit of an angry song about a society being at each other's throat in the scarcity economy. But musically, it's just so upbeat that the message in the lyrics doesn't really carry over.
Mm-hmm.
Track 6, Budapest.
She was a good enough reason for a party. Well, you couldn't keep up on a hard track vibe.
I may make a few people angry, but as I listened back to it, I'm a little surprised by how popular this song proved to be in the live set. Because I think when Ian speaks about it, he speaks of it as kind of a classic Jethro Tull song with lots of different parts. There's clearly an idea attached to it that this is the progressive track on Crest of a Knave. And I feel like the comparison with classic Tull is a bit of a wishful thinking, because it isn't really comparable to any of the classic songs. At the same time, I was a little surprised by how this 10-minute song still didn't feel to me like it dragged on.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm completely fine with it. I'm completely fine with this song playing in the background. It can be 10 minutes long, and it can be 3 minutes long. It's good background Tull where nothing to me really stands out and nothing grates. It's like the Jethro Tull Christmas album. It's just familiar sounds playing pleasant melodies, not drawing much attention to themselves. It's a little light music. So, yeah, this is, with all the legacy this song has had, it's not a standout song to me. And I don't mind it. I don't hate it, because, as I said, it never drags on for me. I'm fine with all 10 minutes of it. But I don't think it's really remarkable in any other aspects. Some of the instrumental interludes are very inventive, but it's so smoothly played, and the production is so smooth, it just blends everything together into this background performance.
Yeah, I sort of agree. I don't like this song as much as a lot of people do, which I know a lot of people do consider it kind of a classic, and I can kind of see why, just because I think the central melody is great, kind of the central piano melody. It's a fantastic, catchy melody, and it kind of goes down as one of the best Tull melodies, I think. But I think you're right that overall the song, it doesn't stand out that much to me as kind of a complete piece. And even though I think this is one of the longest Tull songs, like not counting obviously Thick as a Brick and Baker Street Muse and stuff, but it doesn't feel like it's 10 minutes. It doesn't overstay its welcome, in my opinion. But yeah, I don't listen to this one that often outside of the album, even though I think it's a perfectly fine song, and I appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah, I feel that it could have been delivered with more interest. That's what I'm thinking about it. Like I said, the instrumental interludes are interesting, and the minimalistic approach to them, when it's not just everyone going all out on their instruments, where there's very clear focus on the acoustic guitar, but all at the same time, it is a little bit unremarkable.
I do like some of what they go for in the long bridge. Like I like the acoustic guitar, which it may be a Spanish guitar. I don't know.
It could be. I didn't think what kind of instrument I was hearing.
And I like some of the guitar melodies throughout the bridge. And the violin also comes in, as we mentioned. Although some of the bridge, it starts to feel like noodling after a while for me. But I mean, in general, it's fine, I think.
Yeah, it's noodling as in a little light music, pleasant noodling. Thematically, it's quite similar to Said She Was a Dancer.
Yeah.
But actually based on real events. So yeah, again, the theme of consent emerges in another song on this record, and it's not the last time we'll hear of it.
For some reason, I had a memory that this song was shortened on the vinyl, but I looked it up and it actually wasn't. So I don't know where that came from. But we didn't mention this earlier, but for anyone who doesn't know, this album was similar to Under Wraps in that the vinyl and the CD had different track listings. So the CD had, I think, 2 extra tracks, and similar to Under Wraps, the extra tracks are kind of spread throughout the track listing. It's not just all grouped at the end like a bunch of bonus tracks. But yeah, I've heard this live. I think Ian played it on the 2011 tour I saw, they played this song, and that's all that I remember. But yeah, this one's been played a lot, especially in kind of modern times.
Yeah, because it's a good song to play live. It's got different sections. It's got a little bit of noodling that allows you to improvise and keep people interested, probably.
But this is, speaking of this being a kind of a legendary Tull song, this is one of my dad's favorite Tull songs ever.
Uh-huh.
He always talks about this one.
What does he say about that one?
I'll have to ask him next time. I just remember him mentioning he likes this one a lot. But well, actually, so he studied abroad in Europe when he was a kid. Or not a kid, but in college. And from what I remember, he went to Budapest during that time. So I think it's kind of a nostalgia thing for him.
Uh-huh. I can see that happening for sure.
Track 7, Mountain Men.
And later on the coast road, and meet them and the old man wins.
So this is one of the tracks that I don't have a lot on. All I can really say, this one is quite AOR rock to me.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. It's a little bit surprising, especially with the track listing on the album, that the intro motif is very similar to Budapest.
Yeah, I can see that.
And after the first quieter part of the song, the transition to rock kind of to me seems abrupt. And it slightly robs the song of its mystery, because thematically it's a kind of a storm-watchy kind of song, but musically it feels again a little bit upbeat, especially with the rhythm, and that AOR atmosphere doesn't let the message of the song be delivered as powerfully as it could have been, because I think it's the songwriting on this song is quite nice.
Yeah, part of what bugs me about it is there's more kind of chimey key sounds and kind of high-pitched flute, which there's a lot of kind of high-pitched trebly flute on a lot of this album.
Yeah, that's kind of its vibe, and one of the reasons I'm not really thinking of it as hard rock with that kind of frequency content. In the lyrics, there's a moment I'd like to talk about, the verses that are to do with people from Scotland and the Isles going to fight for Great Britain. Long generations from the Isles sent to tread the foreign miles. And when I heard that and read that, it made me think of a Scottish song called Tatties and Herring. Most of the song extols the virtues of potatoes and herring, and it has a kind of a Scottish pride, but it's also very tongue-in-cheek, and it's both of these things at once. And there's a verse in there, I'm not going to recite the entire song, but the verse that Mountain Men made me think of is like this, and I beg in advance forgiveness for my Scots. It goes like this: Van the Queen's wanting men, to gang fecht wi' her foes, it's nae to the roast beef devourers she goes, but a war to the north, mongst the brave and the daring, to the lads that were brought up on tatties and herring.
Wow, that was cool.
And
it's like I'm listening to a Redwall audiobook or something.
And that made me think of that, right? It's they're talking about Scotsmen going to find what for them is essentially for England, because they're always thinking of themselves as being completely separate, as we know. But there's a pride about that as well in the song Tatties and Herring, and it's a similar thing what Ian is clearly reminiscing about in Mountain Men. Long generations from the Isles sent to tread the foreign miles. There's not much pride expressed here, but I can see that connecting in the larger sort of discourse, if you will.
Yeah, I haven't read the lyrics for this song entirely, but is it about just British soldiers in general, or is it about the Falklands War specifically?
It's not about either of those things. It's just the mention of the Falklands War is one of the moments the song goes through, because it begins with an episode which actually could have come from Ian's experience, or maybe something he imagined, like a farmer meeting some poachers on his land and letting them catch their fish. And then it goes into just reflection on the land where the mountain men are kings and the sound of the piper counts for everything. Mm-hmm. So the connection of a person with the land that they come from.
Yeah, it's all right. It's, it's not offensive to me, but it's not one I would ever really pick out to listen to, I think.
I feel like this song was just misserved, if I can say that, by its arrangement, because like with Dogs in the Midwinter, I can feel a classic Tull vibe in there, a little bit buried under the production. Track 8, The Waking Age.
As I wake up in a room somewhere, the dawn light not yet.
This one also has a similar beginning to Mountain Man, I think, not to Budapest, but I feel like Budapest, Mountain Man, and The Waking Age begin in a very similar manner.
Yeah.
But what I was surprised by was the first line of the song is, as I walk into a room. When it began, it made me think of Tom Waits.
Yeah, I can see that.
So this, to me, feels not like a Tull song, but like Jethro Tull covers Tom Waits in a way.
Yeah, boy, there's I mean, the first thing I'll just start from the beginning of the song. The intro is kind of interesting. You have what I think maybe Spanish guitar again, I'm not sure. And then kind of the atmosphere of the cymbals being played and a very kind of atmospheric attempt at creating an opening. But then the keys sound comes in, and the keys sound is bad on this song. It sounds to me like it's a children's toy, like a little demo that you would play on like a little, kid's piano.
Yeah.
Although parts of the melody actually almost sound like it's a reference back to Budapest in parts. It kind of makes me think of parts.
Yeah, that's what I have written down. I think the melody is derivative of Budapest in here. Yeah, I misquoted it. I apologize. I said as I walk into a room, as I wake up in a room, which it makes it even more Tom Waitsy kind of hangover crooner blues. I don't have much to say about it besides that. It took some time to think about it, and again, it's another perfect example of what you called the hotel room songs, because it's just about a hotel room.
One of the things I can say I like about it is, I guess during the chorus, kind of the organ chords repeating, if you know what I mean. Kind of the bup, 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 bup. I kind of like the uplifting motion of that. I think it sounds kind of cool. But there's not a lot that sticks out to me here. In fact, this is a direct quote from my notes. I have written here, blah, blah. That's kind of my feeling on a lot of the song. Just by the end of it, I was really not feeling it. There's a lot of it sounds very kind of juvenile and just not put together well.
Even juvenile. Was this song included on the vinyl edition?
No.
So maybe the vinyl edition is a better experience, like with Under Reps, which doesn't have General Crossing on there.
The other extra track is Dogs in the Midwinter.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, take it or leave it.
One thing I did want to ask on this song is there's a period towards the end where the bass tone becomes very distinct, and I'm not sure what that is. I don't know if you've had any idea.
If you mean the bass playing the main melody, I think it sounds like a fretless.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like to me.
It really steps
slides,
forward.
The slides, and the kind of a moi tone is very characteristic of a fretless bass.
The only other thing I had noted here was just some of their classic reverb cross-stick drumming, which I think this was Jerry on this song, so that kind of speaks back to Broadsword a little bit, because that album had some of that kind of drumming on it. Which it's not that I'm opposed to cross-stick drumming necessarily, I just think that when you play cross-stick drumming on a ballad, and especially when you drench it in reverb, it sounds extremely stock,
Yeah, it does.
Track 9, Raising Steam. So the first thing that I had written in my notes for this one is finally some energy back. And, I think, I don't know, it's kind of an average song, I think, but the synth in the back is kind of cool, or maybe it's a sequencer.
It is.
I think some of the sounds going in the back there are kind of interesting.
Yeah, overall, this song feels to me like Steel Monkey 2.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's got the sequencer, it's got the drum machine, it's got the same kind of transition vibe between the verse and the chorus. It's not the same chords, or not the same harmonic motion, I checked, but I think it's the attempt at the same idea, exact same idea as Steel Monkey musically.
The main guitar line, it kind of reminds me of something you would hear like a sports stadium, like a sports stadium song.
I wonder if they wanted it to be one.
Yeah, but this is another, I'm sorry to say that a lot of the second side of this album I don't have a lot on. And kind of similar to A, where with A, there were parts of the first side on A that I thought were quite strong. But then the second side just kind of falls flat for me, and for the most part, this album is kind of the same way. There's just not a lot that sticks in my brain on this one.
Yeah, It does have, some of the songs do have a bit of an earworm quality by virtue of repetitiveness, probably.
Yeah.
It's like when I finished listening to this album over the course of this week, I did have kind of Raising Steam playing in my head for a while. But yeah, I don't think this is a very remarkable song.
For what it's worth, I think Raising Steam is a cool title.
Yeah, I wonder if Terry Pratchett was specifically thinking of this song when titling one of his last novels, because there is one of the last Discworld novels is called Raising Steam.
Oh yeah, that sounds familiar.
And it's about trains. The metaphor in this song reminds me of Seal Driver. A bit of a macho love song, but with trains.
Yeah.
Seal Driver isn't much of a macho song, so that sounds a little bit more authentic. And this one just has that four-wheel drive macho energy.
Yeah.
But with trains.
Yeah, it's another one that's okay, but it's again, I would never go out of my way to listen to it, I think. So kind of in conclusion, like I said, I was a little surprised how much didn't stick out to me about this album when I last listened to it. And, you know, this is really where kind of old Tull, modern Tull, well, old Tull is not the right way of calling it, but, you know, old man Tull. I feel like I'm being too harsh on that. But this is where a lot of it just starts to sound really aged to me. I feel like this album is probably never going to get a remix, but it would be interesting if it did.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what could be improved. And this is the first album in the course of our deep dive into the discography where my opinion of the album went down after I went back to it.
I agree.
So yeah, in my rank of Tull albums, this one is sinking. We've talked about Part of the Machine with Stuart Wood.
Yeah.
Which is our second special episode that will be out, should be out, I believe, at the time when this present episode goes up. And we talked about how we enjoyed it and how it was specifically recorded for 20 years of Jethro Tull, so it felt very separate from both of the albums that surround it. It's a bonus track on one of the editions of Crest of a Knave. And when it started playing, when I was listening to the album, I immediately thought that this song is better than the entire album Crest of a Knave put together. I feel like Part of the Machine just surpasses everything on Crest of a Knave by a mile.
Yeah. Like I mentioned in that episode, I like that song a lot too. And I think what it accomplishes is that it still accomplishes a lot of the sound of this album, but it's just a better song. You know, it's still a very dusty sounding song, which I think kind of fits the atmosphere of this album, but it's just a better song, I think.
Yeah, it feels like, as they recorded it specifically, as it was a single session, or a set of sessions, Part of the Machine feels to me a little bit like an album of ideas crammed together into a single song, while the ideas in Crest of a Knave are spread out across 9 tracks, and it feels just thin on inventiveness. So what are your top and bottom tracks?
Well, for my top 3, I had listed here Jumpstart, Farm on the Freeway, and Budapest. I might actually swap one of them out for Steel Monkey, I'm not sure. But those 4 tracks that I mentioned for sure are kind of the ones that stand out the most to me, are the only ones that I would kind of go back to listen to. So I do occasionally listen to one-off songs from this album, but that's, like I said, this is the latest Tull album for the most part where I do that, really. And then for bottom, I really only had 2 that really stood out to me as bottom tracks, and that was The Waking Edge and Said She Was a Dancer. What about you?
I will agree. My top 2 tracks will be Farm on the Freeway and Jumpstart, and I don't have another one to add to those. And my bottom tracks would be Said She Was a Dancer and The Waking Age.
Yep. Yeah, you know, it's kind of sad because I know that I think there actually is a group of Tull fans who actually like this album quite a bit. So I don't mean for us to sound too harsh in talking about this, but just for me, most of it just doesn't cut it. I think the difference is that this is kind of the last album where there are some tracks on here that do cut it for me, whereas for the most part, the rest of the discography is more ambiguous.
Yeah. Oh, we're not telling anyone what to think of this album, right? If you like this album, then you do, and by all means, give it love. But this is our opinion, this is our perspective, and it's just as valid. Believe we're, as best we could, try to explain why we feel that way about it.
It is kind of funny to me how of all the great albums in Tull history, that this is the one that won the Grammy.
yeah, because to me this is one of the least remarkable albums now in the discography. And even, you're a fan of Under Wraps. I'm not much of a fan of Under Wraps, but there's a lot of what's remarkable on that album. There's a lot of what I feel they attempted to do. And I don't feel that density of effort on Crest of a Knave.
Yeah.
So in terms of remarkability, in terms of, piquing an interest, Crest of a Knave falls below Under Wraps to me.
It is kind of interesting how this was a return to commercial success for the band, even if briefly, with this album. And I think that was one of those things that was more so a product of the time, so to speak. And I know that, Ian has said that the reason that we won a Grammy at the time that we did was not because Crest of a Knave was a particularly remarkable album. It's just because we were a bunch of nice guys who had never won a Grammy before.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that that's entirely the reason. And the reason why they won in the heavy metal category was just the way the categories were structured in that year. I think they reshuffled them, and there was something about that. But I'm also thinking, does it say something about commercial success and what kind of music becomes a commercial success? That the music that does is generally less interesting than the music that doesn't.
Yeah.
Pop music bad, and so on.
So considering the category of the Grammy, if I remember right, this was actually the first time there was ever a dedicated heavy metal category in the Grammys. And of course it was won by Tull. And I think most people probably know about this, but something funny that Metallica did was when they won a Grammy for their next album, for the Black Album, when they went up to give their acceptance speech, Lars said, the first thing that we have to do is thank Jethro Tull for not putting out an album this year, which is kind of funny. Which, just speaking of Metallica, just as a total aside, we were talking off the podcast a couple months ago, Eugene, and you mentioned that you had actually never listened to a Metallica album.
No, I haven't.
That's amazing.
I still haven't.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'd call myself a fan, but I'm very familiar. Well, maybe I would call myself a fan. I don't know. I'm not a metal guy, and I never really have been, but I do listen to metal, but I kind of have to be in the mood for it, It's kind of the same with blues, like we mentioned a long time ago. It's not that I'm predisposed against metal, but I can't listen to it all the time. And it's really interesting to me how, of all the genres of music, metal is one of the genres where there's a lot of people who only listen to metal their entire life.
Yeah.
And I would never be able to do that.
Yes, since we're just going on a tangent here, I used to listen to some metal music when I was a teenager. And surprisingly, I listened to a couple Slayer albums.
Oh, nice.
Like I had them and listened to them, but I just never vibed with Metallica. So
really,
I had specific things I enjoyed, and I did listen to Halloween, the German speed metal band, and I think King Diamond as well.
Oh, King Diamond's awesome. I love King Diamond. Merciful Fate, all that.
These days, there's very, very few heavy or metal music that I enjoy, which is partly interesting because with my band, I play progressive and psychedelic music. And these days, a lot of progressive and psychedelic music is heavy.
Yeah.
Like you have lots of prog metal, and with psychedelic, you've got stoner metal, which sort of dominates the genre. One of the bands I really, really like call their music heavy. They kind of present themselves as a heavy band. It's a relatively unknown Australian band called Turtle Skull. They call themselves Flower Doom, but possibly for the reason of the vocals that they have, I really enjoy their music, but I don't think of it as being heavy. I just think of it as being, I don't know, engrossing.
Yeah.
while they do have heavy guitars and kind of a slow, heavy vibe to them. But metal, as in pure metal, as thrash metal and so on, I really don't listen to.
I love that you listen to Slayer, because I love Slayer. I always say that everybody loves Slayer. I don't care who you are. Everybody loves Slayer. The whole world loves Slayer. But I don't know. The metal I listen to is usually, like you'd say, like classic thrash metal. And to me, the metal that I like, for the most part, there's always kind of a connection between that metal I like and hardcore punk. Because, I mean, to me, thrash metal is just hardcore punk taken to a new extreme. That's kind of all that thrash metal is. So
yeah, I can see that.
But for Metallica, even for Tull fans, because I know that a lot of Tull fans, they really get off on hating Metallica, which is kind of silly to me. I don't think there's any actual rivalry there. But, Metallica is a band that I think every music fan should listen to at least one Metallica album in their life. That's my opinion. And, most people would say to listen to Master of Puppets, which is probably a good idea, but my favorite is Ride the Lightning. But I encourage every Tull fan to at least listen to at least one Metallica album in your life. That's my advice.
Maybe someday I will. Speaking of Australian bands, there's a more popular Australian band I like, who are King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
Yeah, they're
and
pretty well known.
They did an album very much influenced by Metallica called Infest the Rat's Nest. And it's one of the albums in their discography that I never listened to. I listened to it once, I think, or even twice to give it another chance, but that's one that's not for me.
Well, anyway, enough of that tangent. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Let us know what you think about Crest of a Knave. Are we too harsh on it? Do you like it? What do you think about it? Let us know, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Cheers.
Thanks.